We're continuing, and Julio, where are you? I cannot see you. Ah, you're there. Come on stage. Julio is the moderator of the next dialogue. Jaya from NIM, Sebastian from HOPR. This dialogue originated from Ligi's idea, like, let's talk about infrastructure, and let's put people on stage who can build constructive dialogue in times of constant challenges. And Julio is a nice moderator. And I would say somehow we have another writer in our room, and Julio's book will be published the next year, Decolonizing Money or Decolonize Money? Decolonizing Money, looking forward. Julio spent lots of time with David Graeber that I personally super love, and it will be interesting to see how Graeber's ideas continue in our life. And yeah, let's talk about infrastructure. Let's talk about how infrastructural projects enable tangible products and what are the sustainable challenges we see in the future. So first, I forgot one smallish thing. It's kind of hybrid format. If someone would want to show something, like kind of like 5 slides, we can do experimental way. We don't need to be this kind of like, no? You're all right. You're right. Super. We're super right.
How much time do we have in total?
Half an hour, more or less.
Thank you. So first of all, I want everyone to stand up for like a few seconds just to move a bit the body. We're going to mix a bit our pelvis and our back a bit. So try to like move a bit in circles. Just try to like mix the tension in your body's traffic that's going on through your brains, through your nervous systems.
Thank you, Julio.
I've heard people going to ZK conferences and talking about MPC and things like that. So let's try to bring it a bit to the body and just, so maybe jump a bit if you need it. Check it off. Nice, thank you so much. So welcome everyone to this panel. I'm very happy to be here with 2 very great people who are working on mixnets. I believe this is probably one of the first times that 2 mixnet projects meet. There are not so many. I wish a person from this space could be here. His name is Leaf. He runs a project called Cuts and Post as well. Leaf, if you're here, maybe come. He's probably downstairs smoking somewhere. First of all, I would like you both to introduce yourselves. Who you are, what are your interests, and what are the projects that you're working on. And then we can move on into what is a mixnet. Jaya first?
Sure. So my name is Jaya, and I have the kind of very fancy title of Chief Strategy Officer at NIM, but all that really means is I work very closely with our core developer team to how to kind of like relate the deep technical work that they're doing to the external world. And that involves a lot of work across, I lead the ecosystem team that grows our network of operator. I lead the communications and marketing team for the time being, and a number of other projects in the company. My personal background is a little bit of a mixed bag. Like, let's say, theoretically speaking, from the realm of digital geography. I've been kind of thinking and writing and doing research and doing bits and pieces of technology projects for a couple of decades now that all focus on power, effectively. And to me right now, privacy is one of the main levers to shift dynamics of power in the world. Privacy technology that especially combines, clear thinking around economics can do that even more effectively. Why? Because surveillance is not just a technical problem, it is also an economic problem when we're facing a surveillance business model that runs the internet. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm very, passionate and excited to be working on the NIM project. And I think mixnets in general are going to become increasingly important because we're not just looking at traditional surveillance, we're looking at much more kind of fine-grained surveillance that's driven by machine learning. And machine learning looks at not so much your data, really, but your metadata. So this is the kind of realm that I'm working on. Over to you, Sebastian.
Thank you, yeah. So I'm Sebastian. I'm founder of HOPR. It's also a mixnet project that I've been working on for the past 4 years. Have been working another 5 years, I think, in the crypto space before that. Been basically active in the space since Ethereum launched, which absolutely changed my life. Like, it's something that was like absolutely mesmerizing to me. And Ethereum originally was pitched kind of as this world computer, which I thought was very sci-fi. And Ethereum had actually a way to send data that was called Whisper that kind of moved a little bit more in the background. And I find that very sad because I thought, hey, actually having this entire technology stack properly decentralized is something that makes a lot of sense to me. Have resilient technologies that we can build stuff on. Because another experience that I made was working in a startup that was a fintech, and my conclusion from 1 year of fintech was this is absolutely broken. This does not work, this is not innovation, and everybody stands in your way. So permissionless innovation is something that resonates very strongly with me, and I saw absence of a go-to solution to send data privately as something that should be built, and that's how we started HOPR.
So, just a show of hands, who here knows what a mixnet is? Okay. But there is still, like, I would say 30% hands don't know. So, I would say maybe let's start from the basics. Let's maybe have a trialogue between us three. What is a mixnet? How is it different from, let's say, something like a VPN? At what level of the stack, of the technical stack of the internet does it work? And you mentioned metadata, you mentioned power, you mentioned permissionless innovation. How are these things woven together in the mixnets that you're doing?
Sure. So let's see. A mixnet is different to a traditional VPN in the sense that instead of just routing your traffic through some service somewhere, which effectively just moves the trust from, you trusting your ISP provider to you trusting your VPN provider. What a mixnet does is it routes your traffic through several hops and not just does the routing, but actually mixes your traffic with other people's traffic. So what that does is effectively it obscures the patterns of communication and obscures the metadata of communication, which means that if someone's watching the network, even if they're analyzing the let's say the patterns of packets routing through the network, they're unable to actually trace a packet from the sender to the receiver. So this provides, unlinkability. It provides a number of privacy properties, and it's going to become increasingly important moving into the future.
Yeah, I think that was pretty excellent. I have nothing to add to that. I would take the second part of the question then, like how do you use that and how does it connect to stuff? So computers are pretty stupid and don't do much, right? So back in the days, when people started coming up with a thing that's called the internet now, computers didn't speak the language of the internet, and you needed to install something, even in, I think, the earlier versions of Windows, that taught your computer to speak that language called TCP/IP, which is basically just a protocol to send data from A to B. Now, computers speak that language, which is great. Now, there's other languages living on top of that, such as, HTTP, which now you don't even have to type in a browser anymore. I think the next generation might not even know what HTTP is. So, and basically, this was great technology that was invented to send data from A to B, but it was not built with privacy in mind. So now we basically can make this happen at various layers in the stack, building this mixnet that we just heard about to basically inject privacy into this stack, to be able to access digital services and communicate with other parties without leaking metadata across your internet service provider, cloud providers, autonomous system providers. And yeah, I think that's very important. I guess we'll get later into the why and so on. Yeah.
Thank you. Show of hands. Is it clear what a mixnet is now? Yeah? Okay, so not so clear. So, okay, hopefully throughout the panel we will make it clear. So one key point that I think I want to bring out from what both of our speakers said is that what a mixnet does is that it allows you to actually hide not just the data, but the metadata. So the data about the data that you're using on the internet, which is something that most privacy technology does not do, and that's the key innovation. Now, when I look at the HOPR and NIM, there is a movement, let's say, of going from protocol now to a product strategy where you're focusing on actually providing a VPN. So for HOPR, I believe it's called the Gnosis VPN, and for NIM is the NIM VPN. Can you maybe say, why are you choosing this product strategy, and then, why call it a VPN when you have a mixnet on the back end?
I'll let you go first this time.
All right. So why did we do this? Because, so we had conversations with Gnosis, and Gnosis is pretty interested in a VPN. So for the ones who don't know Gnosis, it's a kind of decentralized technologies ecosystem that builds a bunch of fantastic things, such as the most secure way to store your money, such as the most uncheatable way of trading your money for another asset called CalSwap, and so basically a VPN connects well to this stack of products that are all very much trying to be censorship resistant and self-custodial. And they understand that all of that doesn't make much sense when there's people and companies out there which can trace everything you do out there. Like I sometimes say, decentralization is great, but decentralization basically just allows for much more and much worse data harvesting than even Facebook, okay? Facebook is great compared to blockchains, yeah? So I want to say that again for the people in the back, Facebook is fantastic compared to public blockchains, yeah? So we really need to work much harder on privacy across the entire technology stack if we want any sort of truly decentralized technology to become a reality. And so that's why in this Gnosis context, we want to help them provide exactly that. So we want you to be able to access any sort of decentralized services without in between there being many companies, actually. It's not just state actors. Like many times the thing in the traditional literature, people talked about state actors and what if the US goes rogue? Well, that's already happened. So, but now there's all these companies. It's not just US companies, it's multinational companies that run the internet, that run the infrastructure that our society rests on. And these are the actors that are increasingly powerful, that increasingly see data and connection metadata, like, me talking to you, and infer information from that. And that needs to be protected, that needs to be made available to normal users. VPNs is something that's kind of doable. You install something on your laptop, and you don't need to understand stuff, but from that point, your computer speaks the language that is privacy respecting and allows anonymous routing. And mixnet is the thing under the hood that makes that magic happen. That's my attempt at making these things fit together.
So first of all, I completely agree. I think it's important to kind of hammer in the point that blockchains are terrible for privacy, generally speaking. And, the kind of another major reason for that is, you don't just have kind of user data that's out on the clear net. What happens is you've got infrastructure data that's out on the clear net, right? And that opens up a whole other set of vulnerabilities that are quite unique to the blockchain space. And that's maybe something that we can go into after, actually. But that's not the primary reason that we're doing a NIM VPN. The reason why we're launching NIM VPN is because we want mixnets into the hands of ordinary people as fast as possible. And when you look at the actual VPN market, it's absolutely huge. A lot of people are using VPNs, and many more people are increasingly using VPNs. And quite a few of them actually assume that VPNs protect their privacy. But a large part of the VPN industry are scumbags, to put it mildly. Especially free VPNs. Many times they actually harvest user data and sell it on. So VPNs are not just bad for privacy; they're terrible for privacy. So this is one of the reasons why we're launching a VPN, is to enter that market and radically disrupt it.
Very interesting. So when I look at something like Tor, some friend called, I mean, if you see how Tor is funded, a lot of the funding comes from the US military, which is kind of a contradiction in terms. And since you mentioned now the US going rogue many times, Sebastian, I wonder how do you imagine mixnets becoming economically sustainable, economically viable, so that you don't have to depend neither on corporations, big corporations, and also things like the U.S. government?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is actually, sometimes people ask me, like, why haven't mixnets actually happened, right? And there's a number of reasons, but I think one important one is that it's about incentives. If you want to run something at internet scale, let's think about what runs at internet scale is AWS, right? Yes, it's centralized. Amazon Web Services is centralized. Would Jeff Bezos have, put up computing centers with thousands and thousands of computers if we had the expectations that compute is free? That's ridiculous, right? They wouldn't. So I think mixnets and some of that infrastructure hasn't happened because there were no incentives. Now, I think with public settlement layers of financial value that some people call blockchains, we do have that. Like, how would you have paid for any sort of decentralized service providers before? PayPal? Send cash in like an envelope? And funnily enough, some people tried that, right? So that's, I think, what when Telegram was blocked, they had kind of this funny cat and mouse game and had to incentivize people to spin up servers. So that's really a mess. And actually, public settlement layers such as blockchains and related stuff is actually pretty cool for that. So, I think this is fantastic. So how does that happen? We now have decentralized technologies. We had that a long time, obviously, right? But now we have decentralized technologies that can be combined with money to incentivize anonymously people who run that infrastructure without going through approved and, state-consented channels. And I find it amazing.
Yeah, this is like a really great ping pong because we can just add on each other's points. So yes, all of the above. And I don't know, I think there's a few interesting things to talk about in the context of privacy tech and crypto, because I don't know what your experience is or the rest of the people in this space, but typically speaking, a lot of people in the kind of privacy tech space are quite skeptical of crypto for a lot of good reasons. Let me say cryptocurrency, because just using the term crypto obviously pisses them off when you're talking about tokens. And I think what's interesting and unique about tokens is that they do several different things, right? This isn't money, this is tokens, and it does something slightly different to money. There's a value element to it, but there's actually also a technical element to it, right? So when we're talking about decentralized mixnets, what the token actually allows for is a decentralized directory authority. So what that means is that you can have a permissionless open infrastructure, and what governs the inclusion in the directory authority are the tokens. So we see here a kind of actually a very neat technical problem that's solved through tokens that includes an element of economics, because there's a certain kind of Sybil resistance to that, and it of course also includes the incentive element. So this is an argument that I like to bring to kind of the privacy hardcore spaces. I'm sure this is a much more friendly argument or friendly audience, but I think it's a point that's worth making. And then in terms of economic sustainability overall, like I said earlier, when you're looking at the VPN market, it is a very large market. So what we're really trying to do also by entering that market is to close the economic loop here. So, so far we've had a bootstrapping mechanism, which is the mix mining pool in the case of NIM, which has been bootstrapping our community of operators to set up their nodes and kind of get the kind of operations up to scratch and really kind of functioning well. But that bootstrapping mechanism tails off, in time with adoption of the mixnet, initially via the NIM VPN through paid usage. So we're looking at a kind of virtuous cycle here, where operators, get increasing rewards from real users. So,
Just to clarify this point, so you're saying that NIM works in a way where you have paid, basically mix nodes. That's how you call them. That are providing the infrastructure and are getting paid for it in the NIM token, but then at the same time, you're going to have paid subscribers for the VPN. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I wanted to add some point to it, like this crypto networks, what they allowed us or what they brought us is atomicity, right? And just as a super small, example for that, there's been like a hilarious, I think it was like over $100 million transaction in Germany of a fantastic bank that made a fantastic investment. It was actually a swap. Now, the swap is you send a couple of $100 million somewhere and you get some other stuff back and you do it all the time and you make a little bit of money. Now, there was one issue. The counterparty was called Lehman. And Lehman, yeah, the bank. Now, and that bank was bankrupt in that moment. So all that money went down the drain. It was a lot of money. So that's an example of a transaction which is not atomic, right? It can happen that only half the stuff you expect to happen really does happen. That's really, really bad. Now, what we have on blockchains is either the entire thing happens or nothing happens because everything gets rolled back. So if you buy yourself $100 million of some shitcoin on Uniswap, you can be guaranteed that this whole thing goes through, but you're certainly not going to lose $100 million. Now, in terms of mixnets, what this brought to us, and this is kind of the incentives of HOPR, is not swapping a shitcoin for another shitcoin, but it's basically to pay money which is atomically coupled to the underlying network utility, which is forwarding data packets privately. So we call this, it's a little bit similar to what NIM does. We call it proof of relay. So you relay data, and with the acknowledgement, you can couple that to a payment. And that's what I find very cool, because such features allow you to do that trustlessly in a decentralized world.
Thank you. So just for a bit of context, so recently the US government has sent some letters to crypto companies such as Uniswap and also Consensus in the US. There is a largely growing concern that the US interventionism into the crypto space will break the promise of censorship resistance. How do mixnets support that promise of blockchains, of that early sort of cyberpunk promise of censorship resistance? And then a second question, I want to move a bit into AI, because I know Harry is talking a lot about how the mixnets help to counter AI risk. So, yeah.
Censorship is a big topic, and it's going to become an increasingly big topic. There's a couple different angles to that question. Like, first of all, there's like the question of access, which is an ongoing R&D topic. Like, the question of like whether mixnets are censored, for example, is something that our R&D team is constantly looking at and observing, and working with our communities around the world to keep checking. Because it's a bit of a cat and mouse game. So anyone who actually builds tech that attempts to be censorship resistant in a real way, it really is cat and mouse, because people are kind of like watching and developing new techniques all the time. But the other question that you mentioned when it comes to the censorship resistance in the crypto space, this is where I think it's interesting to talk a bit about validator privacy, for example, and much more kind of like targeted censorship that has to do with let's say having information that puts you in a position where you become a target for law enforcers. And that's what we see increasingly on the kind of like validator and company side, is that when you actually hold data, you become a target for law enforcement, whether you like it or not. And so, and you have to comply, it's very hard to not, and we're seeing the consequences of that. So really, the best strategy to my mind here is data minimization. And this is why strong privacy protection becomes so important, because you want to minimize the amount of data that you actually hold in order to mitigate that risk on a business level, basically, and also to make sure that you can make good on the promises to your users and make good of the promises of the industry overall, which was one of the core promises of, blockchain from the early days, was censorship resistance. So, but just like privacy, we actually see that blockchains are terrible for censorship resistance because they're not private. So that's a major problem that we need to solve and that we're looking into doing. So yeah, both like validator privacy is super important. Privacy between full nodes and light clients. Traffic that's flowing between wallets and chains, and of course like the entire network layer. Let's say. Yeah,
I think there is. To add to that, I think there's this relatively unreflected statement of data is the new gold. For whom is that gold exactly? Well, not for the individual, right? So data is actually the new nuclear waste. And we have to get rid of nuclear waste, right? And how do you do that? Well, you do that by strong privacy tech. So yeah, basically it doesn't help you if you have powerful technologies, if somebody observes everything you do. And of course, people can always shut something off. Worst case, people can, and for example, nation states can switch off the internet. And yes, that does happen, even if it sounds crazy. So I think it starts with the observability, and the observability of interactions between parties is a very important one in there. If you remove that, you remove a lot of observability and therefore, shutdown ability, and that's good.
So thank you for that response. Maybe just to ask again the question about AI risk and mixnets. What are the relationships there? How do you see mixnets supporting, let's say, minimizing the risk of AI, if at all? I heard the argument at a dinner some days ago that some people were arguing that, oh, crypto plus AI, that's great. And someone said, actually, no, that would probably be bad for humanity. If you have a censorship-resistant system that's running on an AI, that's a problem, some people argue. How do mixnets enter into this?
So I could go super philosophical on this question. Because it actually runs really deep, right? Yeah, there's a philosophical element, there's a technical element, there's a political economy element. But the way that I like to think about it is like to kind of take a step back and look at the entire data pipeline, right? And try to understand, how AI came about in the first place. I was at an event just yesterday in Paris with Meredith Whittaker, president of Signal, who's been very outspoken on this and talks a lot about AI as a surveillance derivative, which is, literally the case, and it's such a good way to put it, because, AI is the kind of, or AI as we see it in terms of large language models, is literally the result of, a bit over a decade of continuous mass surveillance and, basically stealing everybody's content and information online in order to feed into these models. So where does privacy tech come into it? Privacy tech comes into it as a kind of literal blockade of that, right? It's a way to say, like, no, you can't just steal all this data. In fact, data shouldn't be something that's just out there for anybody to grab in that sort of a way. It should be something that is like rarely created in the first place, in fact. And when it is created, it should be created with a very specific use in mind that is for the social good and for the benefit of a particular group of people. And only then can it actually be meaningful to feed it into some sort of model in order to see whether it can kind of help with a specific use case. But the way that we see it at the moment is, it's one big, it's a massive theft, and it's based on surveillance, and it's going to be used in turn for increasingly fine-grained forms of targeting and surveillance as well. And so, like, privacy tech kind of enters in on both ends of the data pipeline, let's say, both as a kind of blockade in the kind of development of malicious and kind of, AI that harms society, like, from the start, and then all the way through to, at the other end, in the actual implementation of AI-driven surveillance. Mixnets in particular are likely going to be quite good protection for that, because AI relies so heavily on, or machine learning, is very good at analyzing metadata, right? So the chief scientist at NIM, Claudia Diaz, she likes to call metadata the food for machines. And why is that? It's because it's highly structured and it's talking about patterns rather than the kind of like soft, mushy stuff that we like to talk about between humans. It's much more kind of like, it's much more kind of easy for machines to digest. And so, protecting the metadata is going to be increasingly important for protecting, fundamental human rights in the age of when AI starts to be integrated into harmful technologies by, effectively, military, because that's, military and policing is like one of the kind of major areas where we're seeing that roll out. So, I think privacy-preserving technologies in general are super important. Mixed nets are particularly important exactly because they obscure patterns, right? So they add noise to the signal that machine learning algorithms are trying to surface.
Yeah, that was very deep. I am a simple engineer and not an AI, so I don't have too much to add to that. But I would say, to me, it can go either way, right? It can go Skynet. It can go that we use privacy technologies to fight back against the machines. And I generally believe in a good prevailing over the evil, just because I think most evil people are just stupid. And, if temporarily there is some evil people who are in power, we will use and we will rely on strong privacy technologies to have less data getting captured and used against us. And I'm, very much happy to work on that. And specifically, like we heard a few times, how already without AI, developers get prosecuted. I'm very happy to contribute to technologies that will help individuals to stay free.
I think there's another point to add around AI and mixed nets in particular that I like to kind of think about, which is the relationship between the collective and the individual. Mm-hmm. So, what machine learning likes to do is kind of surface differences, right, in order to kind of categorize and target specific areas, or let's say uses probabilities in order to surface what's going to happen next, but by cutting away the bits that don't matter, which means it's categorizing all the time, whether it's the next pixel or the movement of a person or whatever. And so there is something about the kind of that fine-grained categorization and profiling that's inherent in, artificial intelligence, which is, quite stifling in a way, right? It's both capturing of the idea of a future with free will, and it's capturing of the individual. You become kind of boxed into specific categories. What's interesting about mixed nets is it does the inverse, right? It kind of it adds noise to the signal. It collectivizes things. So the way the NIM mixed net works is anybody that's using the mixed net, their traffic becomes cover traffic for everybody else, right? So it's a collective effort. And in fact, the more people use it, the stronger it becomes. And so you have this collective adding of noise and refusal of closure and categorization that I think is quite poetic on a deeper level as well.
Beautiful. So maybe to bring it down to more the concrete, what are some of the applications that you're excited about that could be implemented with a mixnet? I remember Lee from Cuts and Posts told me once that mixnet applications are basically have to be designed with the mixnet. You cannot have some sort of application that is sort of independent from a mixnet. It kind of has to be embedded within the mixnet. So you're saying anonymity loves company. So what are the applications that you're excited about?
I'll let you go first.
Yeah. So the difficult part is I don't know exactly, but I know it cannot be just trying to mimic the Web 2. So in this kind of crypto financial space, I see a lot of people who are going to, we will decentralize Twitter. Where the fuck do you think that's going to converge on? Well, we have to make faster transactions. We have to get faster finality. We have to get, higher throughput. Well, where do you think that's going to converge on? AWS, right? So I think the really tricky part, and that's why I can't really give you a specific answer, is we have to rethink kind of how humans interact. And I do not think that the current answer of the Web 2 is what it should be, because that is drawn to maximize profit for ever bigger mega corporations. We have to rethink how humans interact and then use novel technologies for that. Because guess what? Mixnets are pretty crap compared to, you know, how you interact with Netflix today. Guess what? Blockchains are actually pretty crap compared to how you interact with your credit card or PayPal today. Guess what? Even Uniswap is actually pretty crap compared to how the New York Stock Exchange works. So we have the opportunity to now build some absolutely novel interactions that were not possible so far. So if we're limited to what many people do, and that's, you know, I don't blame them, that's simply how we work. We try to mimic something that we like. We're tricked to like Twitter, so we try to improve Twitter. Well, that's going to fail. And, you know, still some people are going to raise good VC money for it. And then hopefully my silver lining, again, you know, positive thinking is some of that will go into technology that makes sense in order to allow us to build applications, not in the next 3 years. It's going to take us more 5 to 15 years that actually, you know, maybe make a dent.
Yeah, I mean, mixed nets, you know, there's throughput and latency issues. You know, a lot of those, you know, are being improved quite quickly through R&D. So we're seeing a lot of like improvements in scalability and so on at NIM. So, you know, I agree that hopefully we can get to some like pretty wild use cases coming out of mixed nets. I think like it would be great to see, you know, what people can come up with. But I do think in the meantime, there are some like immediate problems that are, you know, definitely worth solving. So we've already talked a little bit about the VPN industry. And, you know, we've talked a little bit about kind of validator privacy in the context of the Web3 industry. So, you know, those are kind of like immediate use cases that I think like are, you know, absolutely like on the horizon. Yeah, and just, yeah.
Maybe last question. Do you have any question for each other?
You got us in a tough one.
Yeah.
So, what do I want to know from Jaya? So, on the NIM side, is NIM chain going to be smart contract enabled more than a mixnet, or is NIM chain just going to stay in your, you know, mixnet thing?
That's a very good question. We actually don't have a NIM chain per se. Our chain is called Nix. It's a Cosmos SDK chain, and right now it is absolutely servicing the mixnet. Whether it's going to become, you know, something in its own right is a little bit of an unknown question right now. Our main focus is absolutely on the mixnet and mixnet adoption for the time being. Yep. My question for you would be, what else are you getting up to for Berlin Blockchain Week?
So I'm going to shill my, thank you, Jaya. I'm going to shill my talk tomorrow at DevCon, which is just across the river, talking about Gnosis VPN. And I have a surprise on visualizing some things, how you might get fingerprinted on the supposedly Web3 that you haven't thought about. For the ones who are not there, I'll also tweet about it later. Thank you.
So one last thing as well, if you're interested in more local first peer-to-peer protocols, there's also a peer-for-peer on conference happening at offline. You can look up offline.place. If you're critical about you know the blockchain world and want to look for other type of protocols, you can come on the weekend. It's going to happen. It's all self-organized. There is no panels. There is no plan. People can come and self-organize. I want to thank the speakers for. Is there time for questions from the audience?
We can do 2 questions. I mean, we are a bit democratic in that sense. Freedom to the people. Any questions? Hey, Mixnet deserves some questions. Oh, here we go. Oh. The whole Seabase is a Mixnet.
What are the biggest research challenges in mixnet design? What are the biggest research challenges in mixnet design?
Well, the biggest in general in the field is like, I guess it's hard to speak on behalf of everyone else, but I can say what like our main focuses are for the next like few months in the R&D front. Is censorship resistance and improving latency and throughput of the mixnet. So we're looking at kind of new forms of packet formats and that sort of thing to speed up the whole mixnet. Usability is honestly like our #1 priority. Like this needs to be usable for people, and you know those are kind of the two main challenges in terms of usability. Really, is speed, throughput, and then censorship to make sure that it's getting in the hands of the people that actually need it the most.
Is there an inherent trade-off between latency and privacy?
That's a very good question. Maybe one for like a drink afterwards, because it's quite detailed.
Yeah, so I would add one that is not limited to mixnets, but that's a real issue is bootstrapping and eclipse resistance. You know, I think most people try to trick that somehow, for example, by diverting it to another system. That's what we do. It's called a blockchain. And that's one of the reasons why we don't run our own, because we're a small team and there's others that are addressing that. As we've heard, the so-called anonymity trilemma, making useful trade-offs there between strong anonymity, low latency, and low bandwidth overhead. Making application-specific smart trade-offs there. And I would say the third one is, which is kind of new compared to mixnet literature, is this whole incentive part, right? So incentives are great, but compared to the history of mixnet literature, that's not really been in a whole lot of studies of cryptographic or cryptoeconomic security. That will be very interesting to see in the next decade or so, I guess.
Thank you.
Is there like a known number of nodes that somebody would have to control to be able to sort of figure out something within the mixnet?
Yes, but it's kind of, so to kind of try and explain a little bit at least how the NIM mixnet works. When you look at the ability to construct a malicious path, let's say, through the mixnet, it is pretty difficult because what we've got 3 layers of nodes, and each layer has a lot of different nodes. Each packet gets sent through a different route on each layer. So even if you're able to construct one full route that's malicious, all you actually are able to find out is the route of one single packet. So in order to understand like enough packets to actually reconstruct the full message would be extremely challenging. So yeah, I don't have an exact number for you, but it's a lot, yeah.
I guess the annoying answer is always, it depends what you're after. And a little bit like Jaya suggested, if you would just want to find out I'm talking to you, and you have tough luck, no matter if it's like NIM or HOPR, it's the same thing. You could just be unlucky that this first, second, and third node, let's say it's a root of 3 nodes, were controlled by an adversary. Well, you're fucked. So, but what do they learn? They just learn that I and you were exchanging one data packet, right? So then, the question is that an issue? And what can we do beyond that?
So Jaya, you said at the start that that NIM's plan is to get the mixnet VPN into the hands of people as fast as possible. You seem to emphasise that. I suspect I know why that is, but would you like to say more, or either of you, if you have the same plan, would you like to say more about why that is and like what how you foresaw it, projected it out?
Yeah, I mean, I can give a very vague answer, which is basically I think we all know that geopolitically things are heating up a lot. And so, the security problems that ordinary people are going to be facing are going to be increasing quite a lot. And so, yeah, having, basic security on that front for ordinary people, especially as they go about, trying to resist increasing authoritarian regimes is pretty important, so.
Okay, that wasn't what I expected. I thought you were saying because if we don't do it quickly, they'll stop us.
That what?
I thought you were going to say if we don't do it quickly, they'll stop us.
Ah, right. Yeah, well, yeah, there is always the risk that they're going to try and stop us. Let's say it's not so much like launching the VPN quickly that solves that. It's decentralizing, you know, certain aspects quickly that kind of solves that. Make sure that the technology kind of can carry on.
Let's give a big round of applause for our speakers. Thank you, Jaya. Thank you, Sebastian.